Okay, and we are live on YouTube this morning. And in his studio, in the heart of the metropolis that is Sligo Town, we have Andy Parsons. Good morning, Andy. How are you?
Yeah, very well indeed. Thank you. Very well.
Excellent, excellent. We've updated the backdrop on my end here because we were getting complaints that people couldn't see the Creative Heartlands logo, and added in the little tag at the top so everybody knows what we're doing.
Good.
Um, so in your studio, this looks fantastic. Just so much like going on behind you there, creativity and stuff.
Yeah.
It's hard to know kind of where to start, but for those people that don't know you, how would you describe what you do?
Wow. Um, I think there's something that I put on my Instagram that says that I like to work with groups and with people and in environments where people come together to collaborate and help each other, which sounds kind of quite woolly, but it's actually kind of how can I put it? It's a sort of an attitude. It's probably kind of comes from quite a political or humanist sort of approach to things, but it's about trying to identify places where people care for one another, people work with each other, people cooperate, people help, people make things. So yeah, that's the kind of that's the, if there's an overarching philosophy behind the work, that's it. But
Yeah,
we were chatting obviously before the start of this a little bit, but that's the overarching philosophy. But the manifestation of it might be a book, it might be a painting, it might be a sculpture, it might be a
yeah,
lecture, it might be a workshop. It could be lots of different things depending on the the context I'm working in at any given time.
absolutely. One of the things that definitely comes across is that kind of like interactive nature and collaborative nature um, of the things you do.
Yeah,
Is interaction with art important? Because again, one of the things we're talking about, or one of the things that it was a project that you started was a kind of a book publishing thing where people could physically pick up the art, and that seemed to be
yeah.
important to you. Do you want to talk a bit about the kind of books?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I'm not doing that much on the book making and sort of publishing side of things now, but it was a huge part of my practice for a long time, and I got into it because I had a quite a well. This is when I lived in London. I started working on it, and I had quite a developed sort of studio practice. But unfortunately, I lived in North London, and my studio was in South London, and I had a toddler. And so the whole kind of like, spending hours and hours and hours drinking coffee and kind of scratching one's beard and making work didn't seem a particularly kind of good way of making art anymore.
Yeah,
Um, so I started thinking about other ways that I could sort of just find a creative outlet, I suppose. But then I suppose alongside that, I was getting interested in the versatility of books and like you say, the fact that one can pick them up and pass them around. They are like reproducible on the whole. They're not hugely expensive on the whole, and I suppose what they do is democratize the kind of consumption of ideas, but in my context, they democratize the consumption of art. So rather than having to kind of go somewhere specifically to encounter art, one can have it on a bookshelf, on your dining room table, wherever. And
yeah,
I think, I suppose that kind of, again, going back to sort of the philosophical or kind of political position that kind of is around it, or that idea that you can make an artwork that could cost a tenner, that you can pick up and you can give to somebody. That's really interesting, and that's what drove it for a long time. And you know. And I think we what we did was we approached our artists to work with who hadn't necessarily really thought about making artist books before. So there was always an element of kind of the whole project was quite I felt at the time anyway, quite innovative.
Yeah.
It wasn't my project, it was mine and a guy called Glenn Holmans that I worked with a lot, who kind of really drove it. So yeah, it was good fun. I'm kind of look at the books sometimes now. I think I should do another one, but the thing about them is that they're incredibly labor intensive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So.
And were these kind of short runs of
yeah,
like,
and what? Yeah, I mean, like I say, I wasn't very good at making ones that weren't, that had any kind of real reproducibility, other than doing it through photocopying. I mean, like mine, or like digital printing on a little kind of inkjet thing at home. Mine were quite basic. Like some of the ones that were made by other artists within the kind of group were quite complex. But like I suppose that was the kind of idea of it. Really, it was a bit of a DIY feel.
It was the kind of almost kind of like punk movement, kind of fanzine type thing.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, like the last book that we made was called The Rebels, and that was hardback, and it was an original edition of 100, I think, maybe 200, I can't remember. But anyway, I got the Pollock Krasner Foundation grant at the time, so I was able to kind of use that as a springboard to kind of make the work and kind of explore it and stuff.
And
your DIY thing's important. I think. Going back. Sorry.
Yeah. No.
That idea of making something that doesn't look as though it's been made by, an army of people using kind of the most beautiful materials in the world, I suppose, is part of. Do you know what I mean? Like if you're making something in that manner, then you're inviting other people to make things that are like it, that have that.
Absolutely, yeah. Kind of like sort of inspirational but aspirational as well.
Yeah, in that sense, yeah.
Very good. And the exhibitions around them were more kind of like setting up a kind of a nice space that people could kind of feel welcome and engaging in it.
I think exactly. I think quite a lot of the time the exhibitions were. We did a few where we just created little libraries, but like nice libraries, with rugs and sofas and stuff. And like I'm like a huge library fan, and I kind of find them the most amazing places. So I suppose, and Glenn does as well. So I think we did quite a few that were called Reading Room.
Yeah,
there's a few shows called that, and then we had a reading room, and then in each show we'd have a making room as well. So we'd have an area where one could kind of like encounter the books, and then we'd have an area that wasn't sort of that didn't have people in it to actually help a lot of the time, but just had the materials and like how-tos about
how to make your own book,
how to do a basic bit of stitching to kind of put a
bookbinding
together. Yeah, that kind of, and then all the materials just for people to take away. So they did kind of establish a bit of a pattern, those shows, over the year.
Yeah,
it was quite a number.
It sounds fascinating. I wish I'd been at one.
Good, I mean, like I'm kind of feel like we're kind of a bit of a prog rock group at the moment that are in kind of like we've gone away and sort of like
and
then maybe we'll kind of reform if somebody makes us a huge cash off,
yeah, fair enough. That that collaborative thing, like obviously you kind of collaborated with other artists so that they could sort of like create their own books, and this kind of like you say, the collaborative thing seems to really come through. And one of the projects that I hadn't known that you'd done, but is absolutely fascinating to me, and very kind of Sligo centric, is working with the boat builders down in the Sligo docks there. And that just looks amazing. project that they're working on, or sort of,
Yeah.
tell us a bit about how you got involved with the boat building. And
Well, I got involved. I basically I was looking to work with a community group and sort of and document activities where there was this sort of like ethos of like collaboration and kind of help. And Mary McDonough, the arts officer here in Sligo, the public arts officer, suggested that I kind of, reach out to the boat builders. And this is about 6 years ago, so it's 5 years, something like that. And I kind of turned up and sort of introduced myself, and then just started doing little bits of drawing of the guys working. And it kind of, I suppose I didn't get in anybody's way too much, and I kind of made friends with everybody there. And yeah, I mean, like a lot of my work over the last maybe 10, 15 years, it was all about this idea of like observing things from life. So I would literally just go to the 1 or 2 sessions they would have a week and just draw the guys working on these boats. And what they were doing, just to explain it, was a combination of starting from scratch with plywood to make new boats. The boats they were making were called a Highlander, which was a sort of small sailing dinghy. And then at the same time, they were repairing plywood mirror dinghies and things like lake boats and stuff, just basically a kind of a workshop to kind of repair things. But it was a beautiful kind of...
and just to be clear, this isn't like a commercial thing. These guys are doing this
it's completely...
as a hobby kind of.
No, that's right. It's like a bit like a kind of a men's shed sort of an idea.
Yeah.
But like a really great kind of atmosphere, and like shared resources, shared sort of expertise, and shared tools, and they're really good. And I suppose the first body of work that I created from it was a set of drawings that I think are on my website. But there's like hundreds of drawings. And dry points and lithographs and just basically works on paper. And then there was I did it over several months. I made a picture that's about 14 by 10 foot.
Wow!
It was like a kind of like a frieze almost. But I really wanted to kind of do something that had that heroic scale to it.
Yeah.
I thought it was quite important, and then after that, and this I've shown you these before, but like then I started creating quite small paintings.
Yeah, these are beautiful.
I like them. Yeah, like I like the scale. Yeah. It's kind of, again, it's I'll hold it in.
Yeah. Hello.
It's actually, I mean, interestingly enough, that shape and size, it's very book-like, isn't it?
Book-like, yeah, it is indeed, yeah.
And I kind of like that idea of these things and how they are as objects as well. But like I was saying to you, there's about, oh man, the quality is variable actually, but they're all done in situ. So there are inherent problems there with painting from life. You kind of things get stuck to them, you drop them. I'm trying to find another really quite good one to show you. But like I kind of, that one there is quite an interesting one. That's kind of, I don't know if the camera can pick it up, but it's like one of those record vices.
Oh yeah. Holding a piece of
with a dagger board from a boat in it.
Yeah.
But it kind of also has this double register of being actually quite a kind of abstract looking.
Yeah, totally, yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of them had that within them. Some were like the one I first showed you were quite recognisable.
They're kind of like incredibly slow Polaroids.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. Like someone who's doing like one sitting or maybe two. So that one is kind of like wood and tools on top of a boat.
And tools and stuff, yeah.
Yeah. But then some I'd kind of like wouldn't be able to kind of nail at all and would have to come back to them over and over and over again. it's
So
just
are you trying to capture, you're just trying to capture the atmosphere of what it's like in the boat shed, or are you just trying to, like maybe these are kind of like vernacular crafts that are sort of in danger of sort of being lost,
they are
and you're
exactly. I'm very yeah.
trying to record the, how, the process there.
I am, yeah. I think that I think I've made so much work about it that it's actually done. It's done that, but then it's also functioned as a way of me exploring more, um, formal problems within, not problems, formal things within the work. There is a kind of flux between abstraction and figuration in those little paintings. Some of them,
Yeah.
and as somebody who's not me would look at them and would really, really struggle to untangle what they are until they might see some little figurative reference. So that's been a kind of thing that's probably driven the last set. There's about 100 of those little paintings.
Wow.
In existence. I've got some here, and then there's a advanced graphics over in London. Did a lovely kind of display of them at the London Art Fair a couple of years ago. So no, it's about that idea of craft as well, and about a sort of care for objects and for materials. But then it's also about formal things about painting. How to paint. But it's also because I've been doing it for such a long time. It's actually also about painting time, painting over such a long time, the same motif, same set of motifs, and like, again, I think we mentioned this earlier, but one of the things I do tend to do is to work on the same subject for years and years.
So as a, we were saying this is kind of like a longitudinal study of,
yeah,
that that you can, like you say, you can almost see time progressing through the series, which is again is kind of fascinating in itself. It
is, and I kind of like that idea. I like the idea of being able to kind of like, how can I put it? Like I'm not shown any of them for since 2020.
Right.
But I like the idea that they constitute this kind of, like you say, like a longitudinal study. I like that idea. They constitute this kind of record, both of my kind of life over the last few years, and then of this project as well. There's something in that I think is interesting. I don't know. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm not really sure how it kind of plays out, but I'm just doing it. So, like with all the things, like, I'm doing like the work behind me here. These, not the sculptures, I'm pointing at the wrong ones, but these drawings that are on the wall.
Yeah, we can see them.
Yeah, like they're the same sort of thing that they were started about 8 years ago.
Right. Okay.
And I got them out again because I didn't think they were very good, and I threw a bunch of them away in like quite a good kind of opening gambit, and then I started drew over the top of quite a number of them, and like it's quite interesting. They become like these kind of palimpsests of different tries to get across.
Yeah.
It was, and then the meaning shifts a little bit over time. Like they were all done outside originally, like on the beach down in Kalina Moor, but now some of them have been kind of painted over in here,
right?
So there's kind of layering in layer and physically layering as well. So there's kind of and it's quite open to actually not finishing them and then putting them back in storage again, or throwing a bunch of them away as well.
You seem to like putting yourself in extreme, well, maybe not extreme, but sort of, in sort of different and unusual environments to kind of like create art. I mean, one of the projects on your website,
No,
andyparsonsartist.com,
yeah,
is when you built a homemade raft and launched it into the middle of Loch Gill
yeah,
so that you could paint from the middle of the lake.
yeah.
Why?
Why not? I think it would be a more salient question.
Most people would go,
No, and I suppose what I was trying to do in a kind of knockabout, kind of in a kind of slightly pantomimic kind of way, was to sort of dramatize the strangeness of the encounter between myself or any other artist and the thing that they're looking at, and trying to kind of create an artwork about. And I kind of like, it almost seemed like a way of dramatizing how kind of strange it is, the strangeness of the encounter with things, with the world, with matter. Like I kind of, I thought it was quite funny at the time, to be honest.
How did you build the raft?
Pardon?
How did you build the raft?
I got a break cover on that one. I got some brilliant guys from the fine art course at ATU to help me do it. I think if it had been down to me to build the raft, I think I never would have set sail, to be honest. It would that wouldn't have got very far. But no, so it's a bit of a group effort, really. Kind of like all these things, you see the artists out there, but you don't see all the kind of
all the behind the scenes.
Yeah, hopefully, like on the website, it does actually mention the guys.
There is a great picture on your website of you kneeling down on this, what effectively looks like just a plank of wood with some.
Yeah, it's a plank of wood. Yeah,
with some guttering tubes.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting.
Hanging on for dear life.
Yeah, I know. It was cold as well. The interesting thing is that I won't play around with the computer screen, but where I was just pointing towards the drawings that I'm working on at the moment, they're on this giant drawing board in the studio here, and it's about, the current one is about 12 by 12 or 11 by 11 foot. But whichever studio I've moved to, and I've moved to quite a few over the years, I tend to build myself one of these drawing boards, effectively. And they're always about the same size, which is 10 foot, 11 foot square. And the raft was exactly that size.
Right, okay. So
basically, it's one of those
drawing board,
yeah. It's made of the same stuff. It's like 6mm plywood. With kind of like sort of stud work at the back, and then it had the kind of outriggers and stuff. So, I've actually still got the original raft.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's in my loft.
Okay.
So, but this is, I mean, this could equally be the same thing, and like I like that idea of it. It's like actually literally taking the studio and floating it off, almost.
Floating.
Yeah. You're taking the apparatus that you make art with, and you're kind of putting it in this kind of different place to kind of to sort of almost make a story out of like what a strange thing it is that you're doing.
And the images you were capturing then out in the middle of the lake, was that the shoreline, or was that the mountains? Or?
That was the lake. That was the Lake Isle of Innisfree.
Oh, right, that was Innisfree.
Yeah. Or rather, it wasn't. It was the other one, the smaller one. But I thought it was the Innisfree. I was doing the classic,
right. The classic American tourist pointing at a rock and
just
going,
not really understanding like where the heck I was, and also being just quite afraid. The thing was, I borrowed a dry suit, and that was fantastic. But then I forgot to borrow anything to put on my feet.
Right.
And so I was kind of like snuggly, and I was on the raft, and then the water started going up through my feet. Oh. So by the end of it, I was completely soaked.
But so, like, how did you keep, like, the paper or the canvas dry while you were?
Didn't at all, no, because it was raining throughout it as well. So the drawing that I made actually was about 50% of it was washed off by the time I got back to the shore.
Rain. Yeah.
And then by the time I got back to the model, about there's only about like 10% of it left. So it's literally, you know, if you draw with a piece of charcoal on a piece of paper, it
It
relieves
was an outline.
space.
Yeah. Mm.
That was all that was left, really.
Right. Okay.
I left the drawing that I'd made on the board on the raft, stuck to it, and then it was exhibited up at the NCAD gallery and then at the FE McWilliam gallery. So that it was I didn't kind of bring it back and kind of add to it or try and kind of restore it. Just left it as it was.
As
so
it was,
became this kind of record of the thing.
Yeah. Kind of artifact. That's probably one of the more madder things. It does seem to be a bit of a theme, though, with boats and sea and sailing and water. Like the current images you're doing are sort of from shorelines.
Yeah.
You know, are you fascinated by those things? What is it about them that appeals to you?
Well, I think there's a number of things. I think with the boats, it is very much about that idea of making and collaboration, and I think, I don't know. I think like my dad had an allotment actually, and he had a shed in the allotment, and there was lots of other chaps who worked in the kind of factories and did sort of jobs that were quite kind of mucky and that, you know. And I guess when I was growing up, this is, and
where was this?
It's the most amazing environment, and I suppose that one of the things about the boat building is you know, it has that kind of like allotment-esque feel to it. It's quite a contemplative, quiet place. That's kind of quite a social thing. And actually, I've been out sailing with the guys that took me out, and it's been brilliant. But I'm kind of quite afraid of being out that far at sea, you know.
Right. Okay.
This is a really roundabout answer to your question, Stuart. But with the shoreline stuff, there is something about that I think I'm interested in, that is about the body and about ourselves in space and how we interact with the world around us. So it's about perception and how you look at things. I'm kind of like, I don't know when you see it. There's a couple of those that are on the wall just there that are about waves. Like if you're like, I've swim a lot and at sea, and you can't, how do you kind of like do a drawing when you're in the sea? You can't, can you? Well, you maybe can, but it becomes like the raft. Then it becomes this kind of like you create some sort of apparatus for it. So then what you're doing is you're kind of unpicking the idea of like drawing and relying on your memory. So, you know, I'll go swimming, then I'll come to the studio and I'll try and paint the shapes that I've seen, but it'll always be perfect.
No, exactly.
So I guess what I'm trying, this is a long answer to your really simple question.
No, it's okay, yeah.
But what I'm doing in using the water and the sea and boats and all these things, I'm interested in the kind of physical aspects of it, and in the boat building, the kind of sociological and kind of societal kind of implications of that. But I'm also interested in perception and the differences and similarities between drawing from something that's in front of you and then relying on your memory to kind of draw it. The other thing is as well, you know, like perception wise, you know, if I was to draw you now, there is that split second between me looking at you and then me recording it on the page, right? So, but if you go swimming and you try and paint or draw what waves look like, that distance is stretched to breaking point.
Stretched out,
And so a lot, I'm kind of intrigued by that, you know. So
yeah, totally.
Does that make sense?
No, it does. Yeah. And you touched on something there that that kind of came up with for you during, obviously, you know, pandemic and lockdown was how to sort of like engage and interact with people when, you know, nobody can be together. And you came up with like doing Zoom portraits of people.
I did.
And that was kind of an interesting, you know, project.
It was. Well, it was. Yeah, it was. Yeah. Sorry. I mean, I think I did a set of portraits about 10 years ago, and I don't know why, but I called it the Andy Parsons Project. I think, like
Yeah, yeah.
just made me laugh.
The Alan
Thank
Parsons
you for
Project.
laughing,
Yeah,
sis. Nobody else laughed.
I'm old enough to know the Alan
Yeah,
Parsons Project.
exactly. And I did this thing where I got people to come in to a studio I had over in Wolf Town Street in Sligo, and just to come in and I paint their portraits, and that was it. So it was actually quite. I was really interested in this idea of portrait as this as a collaborative endeavor, or something that it's
It
not
isn't
about,
just a passive sitter. That
yeah.
it's more about the conversations that you have during the.
Exactly, and so that's what the portraits that I did during Zoom were called Conversations in Portrait, and they were, I mean, to an extent, one could argue that the portraits were really a kind of a vehicle for the conversation, rather than kind of being the thing themselves. So, I always try to make really good portraits, but it was the quality of the crack and the conversations that we were having during the making of the portraits that was really interesting as well. They were with older people who might have at the time been struggling to kind of have their normal kind of social interactions. So it felt like it was a good thing to try and do, to kind of like create an opportunity for like cultural engagement, but to do it in a really safe way that people kind of like do at their own pace at the time of their own choosing, etc. And like, I mean, the really interesting thing about it, before we move on, I think, is the fact that I've made about 40 of these portraits, and not one of them has been displayed publicly. Because what I did, we had the kind of Zoom sessions to make the portraits. They were completely dried. The sitter would say, "Yeah, I'm happy with that."
Yeah.
Hopefully, usually, and then I would pop them in the post to the sitter.
Yeah.
And that would be the kind of, so they decide whether, if they wanted to show them to friends or family, or put them in their social media or whatever they wanted to do with them. But they took over not only the ownership of the object, but also the mediation of the object as well. And I'm actually really intrigued by that as a kind of new paradigm for kind of like what you do with art, really.
Totally, it's amazing. It's just brilliant, really good. And for them, it was probably more about the conversation. When they look at the picture, they just remember the experience. It's like it's a physical embodiment of an experience that they had, which is, again, it's kind of really interesting.
It is, and I think maybe it's making something positive out of a time that was for a lot of people negative as well, which is kind of part of it. I think. I mean, what's really intriguing, going back to this idea of like perception and how one kind of records the world in visual art. How do I know how good these portraits are? Because I've in very few cases have I ever met the people that I painted over Zoom.
Yeah.
And
have you met any of them since like lockdown finished?
No. I've seen photographs, a couple of photographs of the people with them. I don't know how they seem to kind of measure up, but like, it's difficult, isn't it? I don't know. You can have somebody in a room and you can kind of paint them with as much fidelity as you can kind of put into it, and they can still be, superficially at least, a mismatch between the portrait and the sitter.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever seen, there's a brilliant picture of Lucian Freud painting the Queen of England. And, the Queen looks the way she is, and Freud's painting looks completely unlike her. And like, he was a really gifted portraitist, obviously.
No, I've seen that picture,
Titan of kind of portrait painting. And I don't know. That's another whole kind of worm camp. But there's something really interesting there about, in terms of like how you record what's in front of you, but then what what anomalies might be in there, and then what photography puts into the mix as well, that kind of maybe distorts or changes things, you know.
Totally, yeah. So another project that you began just before lockdown is what's kind of sitting behind us there,
Yeah.
which was your
Yeah.
residency in Sligo General Hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Do you want to talk about how that came about, and the kind of the curveball it kind of threw you?
Sure. Yeah. Basically, so the model commissioned me to work at Sligo University Hospital as artist in residence, and to work with the renal unit. So the idea was that I would work there with patients and basically like facilitate art making. So what I did over the course of like 6 months, I think it was to kind of go in a few times a week and help people who were having dialysis to actually do some art whilst they were
while they're sitting there
having the
on the
treatment.
machine.
And so it was really, really interesting. It was quite challenging because there are, it's quite one is quite restricted in terms of like the space that's available and what one could do. But we kind of like, patients kind of made beautiful little kind of watercolors on watercolor paper and then little gesso boards, and they made these super things. And towards after I kind of been there a few months and we've been working, I took a little bit of a step back from instruction, as it were, to actually start to make my own work as well. The other thing I was doing was to occasionally set up an easel in the kind of main reception area of the hospital and just paint people coming and going as well. A little bit, okay. This idea of like, you refer to the raft, this idea of placing oneself in a position.
Yeah, in an unusual environment. Yeah,
exactly the same thing.
Sort of
so basically,
verite style,
Yeah, exactly. An easel set up.
Yeah.
Pointing towards the main entrance and the coffee shop of the hospital. So I'd done all this work, but then of course COVID came along, and so I had to basically kind of pull out of working in the hospital because of the restrictions, etc. So the model kind of provided me with the studio to work in, and then I think over time I started to make some work that was based on the little drawings that I'd done in the hospital, but also on memory as well. And to an extent the work became autobiographical because my son had been very ill and had been in that hospital, so I kind of knew every inch of it. So I think I started to make work that was about the experience of being there, but without the input and collaborative sort of input of the patients, I guess. So the work that I was making was my own work, perhaps more than it would have been if I'd have been carried on in the hospital, which it might have been more of a collaborative sort of approach, So the work that's in the studio that you can still see some of, so like these little sculptures here, we'll come back to that, and then the big one, and then if you can kind of see behind me,
behind you there, absolutely,
sculptures, they're in the show at the moment as a result of the kind of work that I did after I left. And the show was called Patience. And it was about
kind of a bit of play on words.
But like I kind of like Patience was kind of like a multifaceted sort of thing, in the sense that, like, if you're in hospital for any kind of reason, you give yourself over to the experience, to the process of being in that hospital, and you need patience. You need to kind of like say to yourself, right, I'm here and it's going to take as long as it's going to take. And I know it's not like as a kind of criticism of the health service or anything, but it's just, it's an inherent part of being under somebody else's care, that you need to have that kind of patience. But then it also referred to more specifically to the kind of the amazing kind of fortitude and patience that the patients in the renal wards seem to have, where they had this, having to go in several times a week and have this very, very kind of intensive sort of treatment. But then it also refers to the actual, which what we've been talking to about with other areas of work, is this idea of having the patients to sort of see a project through over the course of many years.
Yeah.
And then also for it to end up in skip after those years. So that idea of like the patients one needs to make art. So that was the show, and it had the plaster sculptures and a set of six 3 meter square paintings, and then a bunch of lithographs and paper and smaller paintings as well. So, but these smaller things here are the most recent, and they're I'm still like with all these projects, I'm still kind of working on it, even though the residency and the exhibition finished sort of January this year.
So this was how we kind of like got together, so to speak. You came to me and you said, I have this large statue or sculpture, and I need to send it over to Japan, I think it was, or
that was
and because it's made of plaster, it's very delicate and it probably won't survive the transport.
Yeah.
Could we 3D scan this and then create essentially like a replica of it, by 3D printing? So that was the first thing we did.
Yeah.
And then that worked quite well, and so we progressed, and the big sculpture behind you there.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah, that one there. Explain what we did. We basically, you took over, I think it was like 150 photos. Of it, all the way around, from the top down, all the way around, capturing it 360 degrees. We bring it into software here, which is called photogrammetry software, that basically kind of like recalculates the position of the camera and creates a 3D model of it that we can then bring into the software, and we can 3D print it. And we 3D printed it in a couple of different sizes and the textures. So
there's the
so there we go. Yeah, so they're the models there, and then you subsequently kind of like worked on them even more, and kind of like processed them again. So it's kind of become another kind of like process on top of another process. So it's really is this? Did you find this kind of like a new way of working? Does it kind of like intrigue you?
Completely. I think it's fascinating. I think like in the build up to the show at the model, I was trying to figure out a way of reproducing some of the sculptures, and I worked in bronze to try and on a couple of the smaller ones to try and reproduce them. And I kind of like some elements of it, but I wasn't happy with what they were like as objects. So I've been, if you pardon the pun, casting around to try and find a way of kind of reproducing them. And they are, like you say, Stuart, they are unbelievably vulnerable. Like plaster is kind of chalk, so you even if you kind of seal it, any chip, any kind of it really, really will suffer. And not that I'm trying necessarily kind of like want to say these things for time immemorial, but I'd like to be able to. I'd like, just in the same way that the books can be passed around, like these little ones, like this one. You can pass it around. You can kind of go, it's a sculpture in the palm of your hand. and
Yeah.
it functions in the same way or similar way to the big original, but it's different. But it's, if you break it, then if I ask
Print
you,
another one.
you might print me another one, and like,
Yeah.
and it's that idea that an object, it's not trying to diminish the kind of aura of the original artwork, but it's trying to find ways that you can kind of,
Yeah.
you can broaden the possibility for people to have an encounter with an artwork. And I think that's like super exciting that
Yeah.
yeah, sorry, go on.
I was gonna say, I kind of see it in a way, kind of going all the way back to the beginning of our conversation about the book publishing, as a way of kind of like you say, democratizing art and
Yeah,
being able to put it in people's hands, but in a three-dimensional form rather than a two-dimensional form.
that's it.
So it's new, but it's also old at the same time in terms of like what you've been doing in your practice, I think. So, I can see the connections there.
Yeah, it is. Thank you. Yeah, it is. It's exactly. It's the same. It's the same ethos, but it's just coming out in a different kind of like, the physical manifestation of it is different, but it comes from exactly the same impulse, which is to kind of to make art that is kind of more accessible, not physically accessible. It might be just kind of challenging in terms of how it looks, possibly, but maybe not.
Yeah.
But to actually get it so that people can kind of use it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
And
brilliant. Listen,
the other thing you were saying is about the layering. I'm really intrigued by that. I mean, interestingly, artists like Rodin or Medard Rosso, they, in the beginning of like the 20th century, they kind of used casts and reproductions of their own work to kind of create a huge number of variations. And in Rodin's case, he used casts to kind of create these kind of almost like Frankenstein-y things where lots of different parts from different bodies would create new sculptures. And the amazing thing about like having like multiple versions of the same sculptures, you can try different colors, you can try, this one has a kind of a new base effect
on it. Yeah.
And then this one has a different sort of plinth, and then there's one over there, I don't know whether you can see, but there doesn't have one at all, that it's just on its feet. And so you can kind of play around with this stuff. And if one was doing that, in any other way, it would be incredibly labor intensive.
Yeah.
So it enables you to be creative and to think creatively about sculpture and what it means and what it does and how it functions without this huge outlay in terms of time and resources.
Yeah.
So it's hugely versatile.
Time's almost up. I just want to ask you last question. One last question. Just in terms of like technology, like how do you perceive technology? Kind of either helping or hindering. Your process and practice. I mean, is it something you've stayed away from or sort of gone looking for in the past, or?
I haven't gone looking for it, but I think it's found me because of like the impulse to try and do things that can dissolve the boundaries between life and art.
Yeah.
So I'm really quite rubbish at technology, to be honest. If you saw me trying to kind of like operate my very basic mobile phone, you'd be like, but I'm gonna put it. I'm really interested in what it can do to further my kind of aims, I suppose.
Yeah.
Like to get the work out there for more people to see it, for it to be, for it to do things, for art to be able to kind of, not just mine, but like everybody's really, to be Like, you know, it is an interesting thing. You know, like there's the controversy of the British Museum at the moment about returning the Parthenon model.
Returning the artifacts, yeah.
Why on earth they don't just 3D print them? It eludes me.
Yeah.
You know, the Crawford have done this amazing. I think it's the Crawford have done this amazing thing where they've kind of they've created a kind of digital library of 3D models of objects in their collection.
Digital twins,
fantastic. You know, and what they should do is, and every museum around the world, like the Pergamon in Berlin, should do the same thing. They should just scan all these objects and just put them out there, and just people could print their own.
Yeah, well, there is the Scan the World project.
Yeah, exactly.
The open source library of artifacts. So yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Absolutely agree with you.
Yeah.
Actually, the Hunt Museum down in Limerick.
That's it. It's not the Crawford, it's the Hunt, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the Hunt Museum. Yeah, exactly, in Limerick.
Yeah, and but I think that's absolutely amazing. Like, why wouldn't you do that? Because, you know, maybe the objects look a little bit plasticky, but then I've been hitting these with a bit of, like, you know, maybe some wax or some acrylic paint or some varnishes or some, you know, there are ways to do it, and it's kind of, you know, that flux between like new technology and old. It's really kind of, it's so versatile, and you can do so much with it. I think
that's exactly what we're all about in Creative Heartlands, and I think that's a great place to stop the conversation. Listen, Andy, thank you very much. Where can people find out more about you? Are you on the social medias? You have a website, andyparsonsartist.com.
I do. There's that, and then there's patience.ie, which is all the work from the exhibition at the Model.
Yep.
Which is actually, it was designed to function as a proxy for the exhibition if it got closed down by COVID. So it's quite comprehensive. It's got some amazing text by Dr. Davey, who I worked with for a year in the build up to the exhibition. Amazing. And then then I'm on Instagram. I think it's just Andy Parsons Art.
Okay. Perfect.
I don't know. I'm proving my technological know-how.
You're out there somewhere. Just Google Andy Parsons. You'll find it. Listen, Andy, thanks a million for coming on today.
Very welcome.
And good luck with the seashore paintings.
Thank you very much.
We might see some of those at some point in the future.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
Definitely, these guys are going to I think going to have some kind of outings pretty soon as well. So
okay, that's great, brilliant. Okay,